Welcome to People Unplugged, the podcast from the creative team at People Unboxed. I'm Westy, Digital Director at People Unboxed. This is the People Unplugged podcast. Okay, welcome back to People Unplugged. Great to see you all again. This month, I'm joined by Radika Dutt, author of Radical Product Thinking. You can probably see the book in the background there. A book that questions the usual ideas about product development and success metrics, amongst other things. Radika believes in a future-focused approach. So rather than just chasing goals like most modern management suggests we should, maybe there's a better way of working. I've also found out she speaks 9 languages and likes a bit of painting. So what's not to like? Radika, firstly, welcome to the show. So lovely to see you. Thank you for giving up your time for us.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, perhaps we can start with learning a little bit about your background, maybe how you've got to where you are today. So tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll dig into some of the goals stuff that I'd love to talk about.
Okay, great. So my background is that I started off as an engineer. That's what I studied undergrad and my master's at MIT back in 2000. And then I went into the startup world. I started a company along with a few co-founders, and it was back in our dorm rooms at MIT, and made lots of mistakes along the way, right? So it's been a 25-year career where I've worked in a variety of industries. I've never held 2 consecutive jobs in the same industry. I've worked in robotics, media and entertainment, telecom, even wine, the maritime industry, and so on. And
this is a 30-minute podcast, you know that, right?
And, along the way were many, many, many hard lessons. And I guess I'll summarize the hard lessons by saying that I was seeing that I kept running into the same set of product diseases, irrespective of industry or size of company. And the burning question for me when I wrote Radical Product Thinking was, are we just doomed to learning from failures, or is there a systematic step-by-step process that we could have to be able to build transformative products and avoid these product diseases? So that's what led me to writing Radical Product Thinking. But then what led me to the second book project that I'm working on about goals is that people read Radical Product Thinking and they would often say, I love this vision-driven approach, and not just taking this approach of let's throw things at the wall and see what sticks.
Sure.
And not this iteration-led approach, but the vision-driven approach and being systematic about how you create change. And they said, but here's the problem. In my company, we're driven by OKRs, or we're driven by whatever targets.
Yeah.
And how do I take this long-term view when I'm constantly measured by all of these short-term goals? And that's where I realized that I really needed to tackle this problem of goals and OKRs, why they backfire. And it wasn't just enough to talk about why these approaches backfire. I had to give leaders a really clear answer to what do you do instead? Because otherwise, it's the devil you know versus the one you don't.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into that. That is absolutely what I want to talk about. And there's so much there we could pick at and pull apart. And maybe we do another pod further down the line. But I'd really like to focus on what you're working on now, which is that whole goal setting thing, if I call it that. And in a recent LinkedIn post I saw from you, you mentioned that idea of using. I think you said the idea of using goals to manage performance has pretty much stayed unchanged for, was it 75 years? I think the quote was, even though obviously in that time workplace has changed beyond all recognition. So can you tell us a little bit more about where that goal setting started? What was set 75 years ago? Why did that work? And I guess, why do you think that method might not be the best fit today?
Yeah, we should even start with, it's surprising, isn't it, that this idea is 75 years old, this concept that you set goals and measure people by them. Because when you hear of OKRs, or objectives and key results, when you think of KPIs, especially OKRs, they sound like a very new thing, because John Doerr promoted them, in 2018?
Sure.
And, Larry Page from Google was saying, oh, that's the secret to our success, and blah, blah. You think it's a new thing. But if you look at history, actually, John Doerr used to be at Intel, and Andy Grove in the 80s and 90s had instituted OKRs at Intel. And where did Andy Grove get this idea of OKRs? Well, he took Peter Drucker's management by objectives, made some tweaks to it. But management by objectives is something Peter Drucker came up with in the 1940s. And how did he come up with this, right? Like, first of all of this is surprising. You don't realize this until you start digging into the details. But Peter Drucker came up with it in the 1940s because he was working with General Motors at the time.
Yep.
And General Motors' problem was they were using a command and control approach, and their problem and what they were dealing with was managing a labor that was primarily unskilled labor that was unionized, working on repetitive tasks with very little automation, right? And so Peter Drucker's ideas were just revolutionary at the time. He said, instead of command and control, let's set goals together with employees so that we can measure performance. And so on an assembly line, it was easy to tell Andy's a better performer than Bob. He installs 45 tires, Bob installs 40, very clear.
And we've tried to stick with that same idea or that same methodology for things that aren't for unskilled workers, and it's harder to measure, and hence there being the problem. How have we got there? How have we ended up with that? I heard you say that objective and key results are like, I think the phrase was putting duct tape on serious problems, and nothing more than a quick fix. Take me through that.
Yeah, what we tend to use OKRs for, we want to create alignment in teams, right? We want to create alignment and convey, like, here's the narrative of the impact that we want to create. And so it sounds tempting to do that using goals. But when you question yourself, you say, well, why do I need goals to do that? Why isn't my vision doing that? And so you delve a little deeper and you go like, okay, let me look at my vision. And most companies have vision statements like, to be number one in blah, blah, or to empower the world to express themselves. Or, one of my favorites is democratizing justice. I have no idea what that even means, right? It sounds grand.
People that work there, I would argue.
Right. So you have these vision statements, and when you have bullshit visions like this, then you need goals to say, here's what I actually mean I want you to do.
Sure.
But the reality is, exactly like you said, goal setting works when there is one clear right way to do something. There is only one way to install a tire. But let's say you apply the same idea of goal setting even to a complex manufacturing problem, like you're applying this to Boeing's manufacturing. You see then what happens to Dreamliners and all of their quality issues when you do this, when you use goal setting for complex problems, right? You see in academia what happens when you measure researchers by the number of papers they publish. This is why you end up with a toxic environment where everyone is, stealing each other's work, crappy papers, and faking data, right? So this is why we need to take a different approach. There are fundamental problems with goal setting.
And that's fascinating. I mean, back in, regular listeners will know, so my background, and you and I haven't spoken about this, so my background, I worked for McDonald's for 26 and a half years. So originally while I was studying at art college, and then I went on and worked in their L&D department and corporate training and all of the rest of it. But it was really interesting. If I take this right back to when I first started at McDonald's and maybe working on a till, or when I was working in the kitchen, we used to set very specific goals for people, but it was interesting to see the knock-on effect they have. So let me give you an example. So it was quite common to say to every till person, people working on the front counter, right, you need to serve X amount of customers in this hour, or you need to take X amount of money in this. The knock-on effect with that was people would do that. But was the service friendly? No. Was the quality great? No, it didn't really matter because we weren't measuring any of that stuff. And it's only when we took a step back and we said, actually, is this what we actually want? Is this the best measure for what are we actually trying to achieve? What we're trying to achieve is great customer service and an experience where people want to come back to this restaurant. But by focusing and setting targets on the wrong thing, yes, okay, service got faster, but did it get more friendly? Did the quality improve? So I kind of get that. So you're nodding along. I mean, obviously you don't know the McDonald's world, but trust me, it was, when I look back on it now, that what you're saying makes so much sense.
But I love what you're saying because um, one of the things people respond to when you say something like that is, well, that just means you're not setting the right targets. That just means, well, you should have just added along with targets for X number of customers that you serve, you should have added along a metric for, customer
Order accuracy
satisfaction
or
of, number of 5 out of 5, right? But here's the thing. The answer does not lie in setting more targets because I can find 100 ways of gaming whatever targets you set. And the fundamental problem that happens in companies is whatever targets you set, no matter how perfect those targets are, the incentive you're creating for people is, ta-da, look, I've met whatever numbers you wanted.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I'm going to sweep under the rug whatever bad metrics are actually telling me.
Yep.
And I'm on the front lines. I know what the bad information is. You're not going to ever get the full picture if all you set are specific targets for me. And no matter like what targets you set, it just is a matter of how creative I am in terms of what I tell you or don't, right?
And then based on your experience and what you've seen so far in the research you're doing, what signs show you that approach, especially the key results bit, isn't working? What do you see that suggests that those people are setting those targets and when they're just not having the effect?
There are two things I want to talk about here. I'll talk about some symptoms, and then I want to talk about, even when you are achieving perfect numbers, what can actually happen. So the symptoms. One is, sandbagging, just being very careful in terms of what goals you're setting because you don't want to fail, right? That's one. But let's say you find a way to get past that. You're not sandbagging, you're pushing the team, setting aspirational goals. What I often see is teams then say, okay, well, how do I spin these numbers so that I can show success to management? I've literally been asked that so many times, but slightly different wording.
How can I fudge this to make it work? Yeah.
Yeah, how can I frame this for management? The third thing that happens is, sometimes, like I once heard a product manager say to me, well, OKRs made things really clear for me. I just told my team, if it's not moving in OKR, we're not doing it. But that just means you've missed out on so many opportunities where something was really important to do, but it wasn't a revenue driver in the short term. So meaning you were basically prioritizing short-term things and not investing in your vision. So that's what happens.
Right. Where does that tie in? Because before we move on, where does that tie in with is it Goodhart's law, which is the measure becomes the target and therefore it's not a good measure anymore? Have I got that bit right?
Yes, I love that you know Goodhart's law, right? Because not a
it's
lot
one
of
of those
people
things that for me makes so much sense. It's like, well, hold on, that measure, you explain it better than I can. There you go.
Okay, so Goodhart's law says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And he was so Goodhart is known as for being an amazing economist. He worked with central banks. So this was his law that was well known in economics. There's also Campbell's law, which basically says that anytime you start to evaluate performance using metrics, those metrics are likely to be gamed and therefore become unreliable as a measure of success. So we've known this from anthropology, and so that was Campbell's field, and you see this in education, where when you start to measure teachers by the test scores of students, then you see this behavior of teaching to the test. So this is all well known, except in business, we've just always thought we can defy laws of gravity and we can fly with wings if we just flap hard enough.
Yeah. Do you know, Radhika, completely off at a tangent here. You've absolutely just made my day in a way that you will never really understand. And let me explain what I mean. You've just explained someone that said, well, their field was anthropology and this is what I come up with. My eldest daughter's doing an anthropology degree at Cambridge here in the UK. And she's like, I love it, but I don't really know what I'm ever going to do with it, and nobody ever knows. I'm literally going to play back to her the bit you've just said there and saying the field was anthropology, and this person look, and you're quoting them, so that's absolutely going to make my evening. You've made my job as a dad very much easier today. So thank you very much. That was brilliant.
Oh, here's one more thing to add to it. Oh, you touched on a topic that I'm so passionate about. I think, today what happens is we so focus on STEM and meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. And we focus on that. And it's almost, again, this obsession with numbers that is going to get you a high paying job or whatever else. And this is what you focus on. You're going to be able to code. The thing is, anthropology, psychology, all of these fields, philosophy, they get you to think. And that is something we're starting to abdicate, especially with AI. We are starting to abdicate learning and thinking to just machine intelligence.
Love that. Thank you. I'm going to quote all of this. So getting back to the goals thing then. So if the way we're currently setting goals is just a quick fix or a temporary patch, and why do so many companies continue to do it? Why do they continue to rely on those metrics? Most of the companies that I've worked for back in the day, at the start of each year, will set goals and we'll say, this is how we're going to measure you. This is what we're going to do at a high level. And then they'll break that down into departments and go, okay, how are we going to measure your department? And what is that just because that's the way we've always done it? Or why does that still happen?
Yeah, those ideas have stuck with us since the 1940s, and there's never been an alternative that has been proposed that felt viable, right? We've never heard, well, here's how else you can do it. Let's go back to the history of Intel. Andy Grove was titled the father of OKRs, and John Doerr was crediting Intel's success to Andy Grove's instituting OKRs. But if you look at what Walter Isaacson said about Andy Grove and what actually led to all of this just revolutionizing innovation at Intel, it was his paranoid obsession with never getting complacent. That is what Isaacson described, right? And in fact, Andy Grove, by the way, wrote a book saying only the paranoid survive. And what he encouraged in his company was constant experimentation, challenging ideas, adapting, assuming that your market is going to go through unexpected changes. Like, just expect the unexpected was his motto. He had a cubicle along with everyone else because his idea was, my ideas are equal to yours. You should be able to challenge them. He made himself, he had this egalitarian approach, so anyone could challenge his ideas, right? We sort of forgot about all of that aspect of what made him successful and so innovative. We only looked at OKRs. This is like looking at Steve Jobs and saying Steve Jobs was successful because he wore a black turtleneck, so I'm going to wear a black turtleneck.
Yeah. We're picking out the bit that suits. Exactly that.
You're right. It suits because it is easier. It is easier to say, oh, here's how you do goal setting. Here's what you do at the beginning of the year. And then you're all set as a leader, like that's a framework that feels easy to adopt because it's easier to tell someone you can wear this black turtleneck and be successful, as opposed to say, oh, here's the long list of things that you can do so that you can be successful as a leader and so innovative, right? So what I'm working on in this next book is to offer that framework for, instead of just having OKRs, like, here's what you actually do to create this framework in your company, and scaffolding in your company for experimentation, learning, and adaptation.
So you've suggested the new approach, and that focuses on, I think you call them OHLs, isn't it? So objectives, hypotheses, and learning. Instead of, is that alongside OKRs, or are we replacing OKRs? I guess let's take it back a step. And say, why don't you explain how the OHL framework differs, maybe, and where it fits in? So, because this is what we've almost identified a problem. So let's find a solution, because I like being solutions focused, and you may well have one. So let's go with it.
So let's talk about the solution. So OKRs, the idea with OKRs and goals in general is that I, as a leader, I know the solution. I know this is what we have to hit, and this is what we need to do to be successful. It's like I have all the answers already in mind, right? Whereas OHLs,
so
objectives.
Stop there a second. when you actually just play that back like that's just because I'm the leader in the company. Why should I have the monopoly on good ideas? Why should I have all of it? That's a really odd way of working, isn't it? When you reflect on it,
Yeah.
and also how much pressure am I under to say this is exactly what we need to do? I could
Oh my
potentially
gosh,
have.
that's right. Exactly.
I had 150 people working for me in one of my restaurants when I was a restaurant manager. Why would I assume that I've got the absolute answer to every problem that may come up, and not one of those people may have something that might work as well? As you're saying it, it just makes. Sorry, I've interrupted. I
No,
tend to
you're
do this a lot
absolutely
because
right.
I think.
And but exactly. And to this, some OKR experts will say, well, that's easy. You can just solve that problem by inviting everyone else to set OKRs with you. But the problem is still that how can I know at the beginning of the year what the exact solution is? Like,
Yeah.
it's not all preordained. I really do need to figure out some of this. It's a puzzle more than it's something I know at the beginning of the year.
Excellent. So, right, sorry, there you go. Let's continue where we are then. So, what are we going to do instead?
So instead, it's actually shifting this mindset to puzzle setting and puzzle solving. So let's take an example, and I'll share what I mean. Let's take the example of sales. An OKR would be objective, growing the business. Key
Yep.
result, grow the business to X million ARR. Right. And so instead, I might set a puzzle for the team. I might say, I want us to get to X million in revenues this year. But what I've seen is that our sales have grown in the past 3 years and they've stalled in the last year. And the puzzle is, how can we grow our business and get to this revenue and figure out what is going on? Why are sales stalling? So here are some guiding questions under this problem statement. Is it that something has changed in the market and we've not yet adapted? Is it that our competition is offering a much better product and we need to address what our competition is doing? Is it that our salespeople maybe they haven't yet figured out how to sell into this market, or that we haven't given them the right tools? Has there been a change in sales? So what is going on in solving this puzzle? Like, how might we solve this puzzle? That's
Sure.
basically the first part, right? And so your objective is defining this puzzle, which, as I said, is how do you get to the sales amount and figure out what is going wrong? But it isn't enough to just set the puzzle. You also have to develop the muscle to solve the puzzle. But it sounds like you want to add something. Go on.
No. All I wanted to add is, does this assume or that there's a level of psychological safety for the people who aren't at the top of the business to actually have ideas and share ideas and put their ideas forward? That's one part of it. And the other bit, which I'm hoping the answer to this is going to be absolutely yes. I think traditionally, if I was the leader in the team, I should almost be seen to be coming up with the ideas and the answers and everything else. So me saying to my team, do you know what, I need your help, support, I need your ideas, I need your thought. That's going to take a shift from my perspective as much as it is from what I want from them. Does that make sense?
Exactly. It absolutely is a mindset shift, right?
Sure.
And one thing we have to realize as leaders is giving teams puzzles to solve is like catnip for high performers versus telling them hit this target.
Sure. Yeah.
Telling them hit this target and the performance theater that comes from that is soul starving for the high performers, right? Because you watch other people show numbers and you know the reality behind those numbers and you find that soul starving. Whereas you set puzzles and give teams this ability to solve puzzles and you see high performance truly thrive.
And brilliant. Yeah, love that. So we then talked about, I think you were going to come on to, we need to then build this, how do we help solve these problems, or how do we build that knowledge to be, or how do we encourage people to help solve these problems?
Right. So the puzzle solving muscle is something that is atrophied over time in these goal-driven organizations, right? Because whenever I start sweeping bad metrics under the rug, that muscle for looking at bad metrics and then saying, okay, what actually happened here? Is it just digging into those numbers and playing detective, like that muscle has atrophied. And so what we need instead is this puzzle solving muscle that we build up again. And we do that by asking 3 questions. And by the way, this is a free template that I have on my website that people can download.
Love it.
And we'll
Yeah,
talk about that in a moment.
I'll share a link to that. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Perfect. And so the template, the way this goes is it asks 3 questions. So the first question is, how well did it work? And so that first question requires you to even define what is it and what does it mean, how well. And so the hypothesis that you write under this column is, if we try this experiment, then this is what I'm expecting because this is the connection. Right? And then you have leading and lagging indicators where you would actually measure something to figure out and understand the answer to how well is it working. And so this first column is more the analytical side of your brain that you're using.
And are you doing this with your team? Is that your vision of this, or should I be doing it on my own and then I'm going to present? Because I'm assuming I need them to be part of on board with this and solving these problems.
It depends on the context. If I'm a
Sure.
product manager working on a product, I as a product manager, I'm typically looking at this. If I've also used it in a group setting where, in a design sprint altogether, we used we've used this template of how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? Like we use that to learn together. So it could be a group setting. It might be individual, like depends on the context.
Okay. Yep.
So I'll keep going. So that was the first question. How well did it work? The second question is, what did we learn? Right? That question means not just spitting out numbers. So I tell teams, don't just give me all these numbers of here's the weekly active users, here's how much time was spent on site, the bounce rate, blah, blah, blah. Stop. Think about what have you learned from all this data? Weave for me the story and the narrative. And then comes the final question, right? This is where you say, what will you try next? So based on how well it worked and what have you learned, what will you ask for if I gave you a magic wand? And these last 2 questions of what did you learn and what will you try next, those are the right brain kind of questions. They weave the story and they trigger the right brain to get you to creatively problem solve, right? And so what I've noticed is an amazing shift in teams when I get them to start using this. You start to see that people start to think differently.
Do you know what? I'm smiling along because, and I'll tell you for why. We do a lot of coaching and amongst other things, and obviously the idea of coaching questions is that the ideas are there. The other person needs the confidence to share them, right? So, I've worked for many bosses in the past where the agreement was you come to me when there's a problem because I'll give you the answer, and that's what you get. You're right. It's interesting you said it's sort of like clipping your wings, and it's exactly what it is, because you think, well, I'm going to come and ask you and you're going to give me the answer. I'm not really going to learn anything or think for myself. I'm just going to do that. But I worked with a boss back in the day, and he was slightly different, his approach, and it's almost word for word what you've just said. He used to say, okay, Westy, what have you tried and what are you going to try next? I was like, what do you mean?
Wow.
And once he started asking that question, you'd phone him and a couple of times, just go, okay, so what have you tried so far? And what are you going to try next? And this could be something ridiculous like, I'm going to run out of lettuce, for example. You've got to bear in mind I worked at McDonald's for many years, so there you go. So all my examples are always McDonald's. And that changes my approach to everything, because I'll look at a problem and then think, okay, what else could I try? What have I done? Right, okay, cool. What am I going to try? Only at that point will I then go back to him and say, do you know what, John? I'm kind of stuck, and I've tried this, and this, but it's very similar to what you're saying. It is, okay, what can we do differently then, or what else may work? So I'm never thought of it in that way. We've always used it as sort of coaching, but it seems very close to what you're saying for goal setting as well.
Yeah. And you touched on psychological safety earlier.
Sure.
Imagine as a leader, you start to present something to your team in this way, right? Yeah. You could talk about a project that you've worked on, or just even some features that were released, like whatever you're thinking about, an initiative that the company launched last quarter, and you could talk about it in exactly this way. You can say, how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? And imagine just how much psychological safety you create by sharing what went well and didn't go well. What have we learned and what we're going to do next? You'd get others to think in this way and start to do more of this experimentation and learning. But you know what? You're now giving them scaffolding. This isn't like, an experiment where you're going to spend a ton of money because you're getting teams to talk to you about what have we learned, what are we going to do next. You have the opportunity to sort of course correct and say, okay, someone might be suggesting, here's what I'd try next. And I'd be like, oh, that's going to be expensive. What is a smaller experiment that we could try, for example? This gives you an opportunity to have, one CEO who saw me apply this approach with a team, and it completely changed the company, the market results. What he said was, OHLs are like having ears on the ground, because it helps you anticipate what's coming and then course correct along the way. Whereas OKRs were like a view in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, that's what a lovely analogy that is. Yeah, it's exactly that, isn't it? You've got all these people that are looking to see and almost preempting what's happened. So it's becoming proactive, not reactive, saying actually we think this where it looks like it's coming down the road, and let's do something about it now. And what are your ideas? What do you think? You're the guys that are talking to these people every day, rather than just me, again, being under pressure and trying to solve those problems. I can absolutely see that. What I need to be balanced here. What's the danger? What's the downside? Is there one?
One absolute danger is if you don't have psychological safety in your team, if you sort of throw down the hammer when someone is sharing that this is not working well, if you're, you need to be able to give honest feedback, but at the same time, know how to give feedback so that you preserve that psychological safety. Because if something is not going well, you want to be able to give feedback, but you want to encourage the next person to also tell you that it's not going well. If you make an example out of the first person, nobody else is going to share with you what's not going well, right?
It's interesting that you use the phrase scaffolding, and as you were saying that there, I'm thinking, for me, following on that analogy, that there's some real core foundations. One of which is psychological safety, and the second one is almost a feedback culture where there needs to be the assumption here that any feedback we're going to give each other. So I'm as happy taking the feedback as I am giving it, but that's meant in the right way. That's meant for us all to, it's constructive. It's not there to cut people down. It's much like I don't know, if you do brainstorming and you say like, oh, I want all of your ideas. Any idea is a good idea, and then someone comes up with one, you go, yeah, that's not going to work. And you think not only them, but nobody else is going to come up with anything either. So sometimes I think as leaders, we need to learn to sort of speak last, bite our tongue a little bit, and it's if we don't do this, we keep having the same boring ideas over and over again. Mm. But when people come out with something that maybe is a little bit out there or something that's slightly different, I'd argue it's probably easier to make that more workable, and therefore it's more exciting, than it is to try and make the dull stuff we've always done more exciting.
Yeah, and I think you could even use that crazy idea, tweak it, etc., and then come up with, oh, here's maybe a way of rethinking it. Even if that crazy idea gets you to just rethink, it's helpful, right? But I want to go back to something you said, which was, well, do you use this instead of OKRs, or does this reside in parallel? Because I think that's a really important question. One thing that I've seen, the way I've introduced it, I find that it's a really high bar to tell leaders, stop using OKRs, just use this instead. Because there's this fear, right? Because there's a fear that I'm going to abandon OKRs, but that's the devil I know. So even if there are problems, but, I don't know if my team knows how to do this puzzle solving. You have to develop trust in your team. So as a leader, one thing you could do is you start to use this OHLs in parallel. But just remember that, if you set targets and you're going to measure people by those targets, getting people to present truly openly what is not working is going to be harder. Um, what I've seen leaders often say is that they sort of de-emphasize OKRs to really start to build this puzzle solving muscle. And the more you build this puzzle solving muscle, you realize the less you need OKRs. So that's sort of the transition I've seen.
And how do you see that working in the real world? Is that like, say we've got, I don't know, 4 key goals that we're working towards, whatever, we use OHLs for one of those and we stick with OKRs for the other, and then we try to gradually work across it? Or how do you see that working?
What I've seen work well is start with specific teams, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Okay.
or a project, or start with some area within your company where you introduce this approach, where you feel like, you know, this team. There are some people who naturally are really going to get this idea right away and fly with it, right? So you want to build momentum, you want to spread these ideas. So that's one way of doing it. And one other thing I'll say is, you know, even if you're not a leader, if you're not someone who has any hope in hell of challenging an OKR driven organization, you could be an individual contributor and say, you know what? I'm going to use this approach of puzzle setting and puzzle solving to give myself catnip. that
Yeah.
that, you know, you work if it feels soul starving for you. Like, imagine someone asks you, Westy, like, tell me what goals you want to set for yourself for this year, versus they ask you, tell me what puzzles you want to solve this year.
Yeah.
Like, it instantly makes you more excited and want to do something differently, right?
Do you know, as you're saying, literally as you're saying that, asking me that question, when you say the OKRs and what goals you want to set, the things that come into my mind are just the same stuff that we've always set and always done. It's like, I want to improve sales, and we want to do this, and we want to improve. And you think, what do I actually really want to do? What I really want to do? I'd love to learn how to play the bass guitar better, you know, or I'd love to learn how to, whatever it may be. I don't know. There's some, like, how can you do that then? Well, I don't know. It's not really a work thing. Well, there are things I can do. You know, there's lots of things I can do to work towards that. Or, you know, you're right. We are so stuck in the rut that we've always been in, and possibly because we started doing this, what do you say, the 1940s, and nothing's changed since. So this, you know, all we talk about now is AI and everything's changing and all the rest of it. I think there's so many things that certainly in learning and development, we're still talking about models that were set up years and years and years ago, and we talk about some of this stuff, and you think, is that the way the world works now? Is that really? Is that still really relevant? And I love the fact that you challenge that and start saying, yes, we've always done it that way, but then you know what? If we stick with that mentality, you and I would be riding horses still, wouldn't we? Because do you know what I mean? We would. It's like, what do you mean cars? That's ridiculous. They're going to be dangerous, and it's going to be. Well, do you know what? That's not the way it is. Or even going back to my McDonald's world, you know, back in the day there was no breakfast. Certainly, no one ever drove their car around a restaurant. We never delivered it for people. What do you mean deliver it for people? You know, it's businesses are changing to meet the needs of the public, if you like, and I wonder why. Something as we've gone through it, it sounds obvious. It's an obvious approach to take.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, I think the more entrenched an idea is, the harder it is for us to
Sure.
challenge it and change it. And, you know, one thing I've learned from writing Radical Product Thinking is, whenever you state something and it so resonates for people that it seems intuitively obvious in retrospect, then I know I've hit on a core truth that is worth challenging. And that's what makes me write this next book.
Fantastic. Right. Well, let's talk more about that, exactly that process then. So, when's the book going to be with us? When can people dig into what? Look, I've put you on the spot now. So if people want to learn more, you've already said, you know, I can put off links to the bits on the website, the resources, etc. When can we expect the book? When can we really dig into this stuff?
So the book, I'm working on writing it, and so it's actually going to come out about a year from now.
Okay.
So I want to share this more as a sneak preview for listeners to a book that I'm working on. And the working title is Escaping the Performance Trap: Why Goals and Targets Backfire and What Actually Works. But here's the super cool thing for listeners. If you listen to this and you like the idea of OHLs and you start to use it, you're welcome to reach out to me and tell me your story. I always love to hear these stories, and this might actually make it into a case study in the book because I'm still in the process of writing it.
And how's the best way to contact you for that, Radika? Would that be via LinkedIn or do you...
Yes, perfect. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Radika Dutt on LinkedIn, and maybe you can add a link. You can also find me on my websites, rdutt.com, or there's radicalproduct.com. And you'll see resources at the end of this podcast as well that people can find the OHLs template from that link, and they can start to use it. It's conveniently in a Google Slides format, so you can just download the Google Slides and start to use the template to present kind of whatever ideas you're toying with in that format of how well did it work, what did we learn, what are we going to try next.
And I'm going on to do that. As soon as we finish that, the first person going to that website download is going to be me. That's great. And that I'll come back to you and ask questions about it.
I love it that you have this L&D background, because one thing I've discovered that I didn't know at the start of this process when I came up with those 3 questions, when I did research, I realized that this is actually a framework called what, so what, now what.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't know about this, and that it was used in both medicine, but also in just learning to get people to reflect, because reflection is so core to learning.
Yep, yeah. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them is the other one. It's exactly the same sort of thing. That was probably way too quick. No, that's lovely. So I'll share all details of that. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Firstly, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the chat. Before you go, though, and for regular listeners, they'll know what's coming, I always end with the same question. What does the ultimate weekend look like for you?
Oh.
You can't write your book.
No. If anything, I think, what I've never done that I really want to do is a meditation retreat.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That's what I'm craving right now in this moment when you ask me this question. But otherwise...
What's stopping you? Oh, I've gone on coaching now. Sorry, don't worry about that. Let's not do that.
No, it's just I always think, I'll meditate by myself, and I do meditate, but I kind of want more of it at the moment. I think, especially because I'm in this writing process, etc., and I feel like I'm doing so much that I'm craving that.
Okay, so meditation retreat is your ultimate weekend. There you go. We'll check in with you and find out how that's worked out for you. Who knows? You'll probably take that time and you'll come back and then the book will just take off at that point because you'll be so relaxed.
Exactly. Ask me again, maybe 6 months from now. My answer might be very different.
I will hold you to that. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And as I say, I'll share all of the links that you've done for the listeners. But in the meantime, good luck with the book, and we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was so lovely to talk to you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Feeling curious to learn more about how we help people remember stuff? Well, why not sign up for a free trial of our AI-powered bite-sized learning app, BentoBot? You can do that easily at bentobot.com. And you can catch up on interviews with all of our previous guests by subscribing to this pod via Apple Podcasts or any podcast platform. Till next time, take care.